The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and FreedomSlips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, FreedomSlips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
You're back with David Mackey's Shiny Side Out. Now, you know it's on freedomslips.com, and it is the #1 listener-supported talk radio on the net. And before I say push the donate button and subscribe, which I've already said, ironically, I would like to also tell you why this is listener-supported. And it's not because of the lack of sponsorship opportunities. It's because sponsors or advertising end up controlling the messages. And because we don't have that, we are free and open within the box to talk about what's inside the box, because if you talk about what's outside the box, you end up getting deplatformed. Yeah, crazy irony there. Yeah. Yes, what was that? There was a bit of static. I couldn't hear a word I was saying. Look, the archives are only $5 per month to have access to it. Seriously, it's only worth the value of a coffee, not a copy. You can download the whole thing, all of the shows, but, to get the updated shows, you have to stay, access to the archives. And you can also, to help out the station and the running costs, you can get yourself some great merchandise from the station's website. You can maybe even buy a CD of your favorite host shows, or from a previous season, that is. And you can also obtain a thumb drive with EMP-proof. An EMP-proof thumb drive with survival documents on it. There's also seed packs, and there's a whole bunch of stuff. And look, just follow the instructions carefully so that you're not disappointed. Because if you live out, or say in Australia, you can't purchase the heirloom seed pack that'll last like years and years and years, 20 years in the freezer, right? You can't buy those here because we have quarantine laws. So. And look, if you're interested in buying heirloom seeds, check them out. Check it on the net as well, because you'll find Monsanto, create a seed genetically that can't reproduce itself. So you've got to buy the seeds every year. It's been a tragedy in some cases, but you'll find some local people who have access to those. So you might buy some fruit from the shops, by the way, and try to plant the seeds, and they don't grow, and that's because they're the non-heirloom seeds. Yep. Anyway, look, thanks for listening to Revolution Radio, and Mecky and I here at Shiny Side Out, we have already completed 484 shows. This is the 485th.
That is what it is. 480 and 400.
100. Yeah, look, and we're talking about, this is part 7 in the series of the parasitic class rules us.
There's actually a great segue from the chat room, which I would like to. There's this is Packwoman. Packwoman, welcome.
Yeah.
To the chat, unless of course you've used a different alias, which I'm not familiar with. But this is what Packwoman says: we have hydroelectricity and other clean energy and coal. We grew trees for paper and recycled. Everything was in glass and got recycled. We were cleaner when I was a child than now. Rubbish now gets thrown out windows of cars. Children drop rubbish on walkways. We didn't have rubbish, white goods, or cheap clothing. Everything was quality. Now throw away everything. So the answer is yes.
And the person who agreed, Mickey, 100% was you.
That was me. And now there's a reason for that, though. Why we live in the world that we live in, and the reason is funnily enough, is the fiat currency and fractional reserve lending system, which lives on the fact that we must have ever-growing debt, we must have ever-growing productivity, we must have ever-growing profits with a finite resource base. So we are living in a just-in-time society, as far as delivery is concerned, but we're also living in a throwaway society where nothing. So everything has built-in obsolescence. So as soon as you buy something, you can rest assured that the next better thing is just around the corner, forcing you to throw away what you have and buy a new thing. Where we even throw away things that we paid a lot of money for. I mean, telephones now, mobile phones.
Woohoo!
They go for $2,000, $3,000, even $4,000.
My wallet's in the car, Mickey.
Yeah, I know. Limited supply only, Dave. You better run. But all of this throwaway society we now live in only exists because of the economic system that underlies it, right? The companies that now operate, they're driven by profit margin, by share prices, etc., etc. The interest rates, the money supply, the artificial money supply, I should say, and it's getting worse and worse every day. Hyperinflation, and I hope everybody understands now why we have inflation. There's no reason to have inflation at all, zero, none. It's all about the money supply, and again, in parts of human history, specifically in the colonial days of America, but even under Lincoln, there was just enough money in the economy to make the economy go around. There was enough money to make the economy run well. There wasn't an oversupply. There was no inflation, and there was no real interest charge on anything because there was enough money on anything. And nobody made a profit of other people borrowing money. When that happens, that's when it all goes south. And this is what we're talking about here. We are in the quagmire that we're in because of the economic system that we have now accepted as being it. No one questions it, right?
Worse still, the banks that never used to charge interest.
Yeah.
Fees. Yeah. Now charge you fees to have the account with them, despite them using your money to make profit from anyway. They make two kinds of profit, then a third kind of profit to be able to use the ATMs to access your money, right? Yes. To get cash. So remember that the monetary system, this is for those who didn't maybe not have caught the other 6 episodes, is about the storing of effort as an agreed value. That was the whole reason why we had a currency of something. So that if I say I only provided a boutique experience with something, I don't know what that would be, like not everyone likes gherkins, but if I made gherkins, that's all I did, then people who don't like gherkins might have had something I wanted, but they wouldn't like any gherkins. So I've got to use a third-party system to store my effort. And so effort in a single closed economy is the warehouse for people to trade. Yes? And so that's good until you start to have leeches, and the leeches are the banks that are taking the money, and then they determined that the only way to truly make money is to loan people money for things they desire before they've earned the money to use it.
But think about it this way as well.
And it costs you twice as much.
Oh, if that. What we have created is a society where no longer do you have to contribute in order to be wealthy or considered powerful or rich or make money. You don't have to.
This is the next step.
The companies that amongst, I mean, not all of the companies are like that, but amongst the most, I guess the most lucrative businesses is Facebook. Or not just Facebook, but other companies similar to Facebook, where you ask yourself, well, what are they really selling here? Well, they're selling you, the audience, similar to what TV and radio did, and advertising. And to get you to buy more things you don't really need. There's this terrible disease that we have where we have to consume. We are now consumers. We're no longer creators, we're consumers. A lot of us don't really make things anymore, right? And this is a real terrible affliction and sign of the times that we're living in. And our children are growing up this way as well, where we want more and more things. And how do we pay for it? Oh, we just take out a loan. We just create more money out of nothing, because that's what's happening. If you've been listening to the last few shows, you know how it works now, and it's a real problem. But let's get quickly into this. I want to share something, and then Dave is going to tell us something about the war
Go ahead.
On page 37.
I know where I am.
But beautiful. So to be clear, there was a vote that was held back in 1913, December 23rd, 1913. The House of Representatives passed the Federal Reserve Act. The problem, though, is there were only 3 people left in session. The others had gone home for the Christmas holiday, right? But it was still in session. It hadn't adjourned. Okay, it was sine die without a day. So they were technically still there, but only 3 members. Okay, so the Federal Reserve is the largest single creditor of the United States government. And they're also the people who decide how much the average person's car payments is going to be, you know, what their house payments are going to be, and whether they have a job or not, right? That's really the power they hold. And the three people who voted the bill into law, okay, in 1913, the Federal Reserve Act, they knew exactly what they were doing when they set up this private bank, modeled on the Bank of England. And the fact that the Bank of England had been operating independently, unopposed since 1694, must have given them a great deal of confidence. Of course it did. Of course it did. The banks that we see today in operation, they are modeled on the Bank of England, but even further back, the people that hold the strings, and it shouldn't be a secret to anyone, are the Rothschilds and their associates. That's who's holding the strings. And you will not hear about them being the richest people in the world. You'll never hear. I mean, Bezos and Zuckerberg and Gates and Warren Buffett, their wealth is known and tabulated. The real wealth is not known and it's not tabulated. No one knows, right? Because it is staggering. People, I don't know what people would do, to be honest. Maybe nothing anymore. But they would just, you would throw up in disgust if you knew how much these people actually owned. And I'm not talking about Zuckerberg, I'm not talking about Buffett, I'm talking about the actual rich people, right? Mm-hmm. But Dave, what goes on in wars?
What? Let's say Mickey is a DJ. Fresh.
What?
It's so fresh. All right, World War I. This was 1914 to 1918. The Germans borrowed money from the German Rothschilds Bank, the British from the British Rothschilds Bank, and the French, I'm going to let you guess this, from the French Rothschilds. American super banker J.P. Morgan was, amongst other things, also a sales agent for war materials. 6 months into the war, his spending of $10 million a day made him the largest consumer on the planet. The Rockefellers and the head of President Wilson's War Industries Board, Bernard Baruch, each made some $200 million while families contributed their sons to the bloody front lines. But profit was not the only motive for involvement. Russia had spoiled the money changers' plans to split America in two and remained the last major country not to have its own central bank. However, 3 years after the start of the war, the entire Russian royal family was killed and communism began. You might find it strange to learn that the Russian Revolution was also fueled with British money. Capitalist businessmen financing communism? Author Gary Allen gives his explanation, and I quote, "If one understands that socialism is not a share the wealth program, but is in reality a method to consolidate the control of wealth, then the seeming paradox of super rich men promoting socialism becomes no paradox at all. Instead, it becomes logical, even the perfect tool of power-seeking megalomaniacs. Communism, or more accurately, socialism, is not a movement of the downtrodden masses, but of the economic elite." W. Cleon Skousen wrote in his book, The Naked Capitalist, a quote here, power from any source tends to create an appetite for additional power. It was almost inevitable that the super rich would one day aspire to control not only their own wealth, but the wealth of the entire world. To achieve this, they were perfectly willing to feed the ambitions of the power-hungry political conspirators who were committed to the overthrow of all existing governments in the establishment of a central worldwide dictatorship. Goodness me, good grief, Charlie Brown. Extreme revolutionary groups were controlled by being financed when they compiled and cut off, with money sometimes being given to their opposition when they didn't. If you find this hard to believe, listen to what the so-called dictator of the new Soviet Union had to say. This is Vladimir Lenin. He says, "The state does not function as we desired. The car does not obey. A man is at the wheel and seems to lead it, but the car does not drive in the desired direction. It moves as another force wishes." I think there's a message in that for all of us. Dave leans towards Meckie's picture in Skype. What's rep mean?
Republican.
Republican.
Sorry, representative.
Representative Louis T. McFadden, chairman of the House Banking and Currency Committee throughout the 1920s and 30s, explained it in this way. The course of Russian history has, indeed, been greatly affected by the operations of international bankers. The Soviet government has The Soviet government has been given United States Treasury funds by the Federal Reserve Board, acting through the Chase Bank. It continues, England has drawn money from us through the Federal Reserve Bank, or banks, and has relent it at a higher rate of interest to the Soviet government. Disbursory? No, what's it called?
Dnepr.
Ah, there we go. Dam, the actual dam, was built with funds unlawfully taken from the United States Treasury by the corrupt and dishonest Federal Reserve Board and the Federal Reserve Banks. That's Representative Louis T. McFadden. And then the last point here is, even when communism collapsed in the Soviet Union, Boris Yeltsin revealed that most of the foreign aid was ending up, we quote, straight back into the coffers of Western banks in debt service.
Oh yeah. It's very difficult, Dave, as you know, to understand history and why things happen. I mean, we learn history in a very matter-of-fact way, dates, names, activities, and then we try to, understand some of it as well, what are the motivations, et cetera, et cetera. But the true history of the world is driven by, the shadow governments and the shadow interests, and certainly economic interests and machinations to pit nations against each other. Because what do you do when you do? Because if the nations weren't pit against each other, then they would have time to, catch a breath and go, hey, hang on. What's going on here? And unfortunately, most of the fates of the nations rests on individuals, like, back in the old days, kings, queens, etc. And these days, it's, presidents, prime ministers, etc., etc. But these are people that have their own individual agendas, which, of course, the banksters hook right into. We like to call them lobbyists, money people. It doesn't really matter. But the people that have interests to uphold and defend will do whatever they need to do, not shying away from extreme and ultimate action either. And you can imagine, in your own mind what that means. You look at Lincoln, you look at others, you know what that means exactly. Kennedy as well. Now, which of course leads us to the next topic, which is world domination. And world domination in and of itself is really something we really only associate with, these cartoonish James Bond villains, stroking white cats and called, Blofeld, as it were, or such. But in reality, this is the end game all along. It's always been the end game. And when I say end game, it's an overt end game, because world domination was always something that was undertaken. For the most part, we didn't realize, right? And it wasn't perfect either. And there were many problems with it. But we are now moving into a society, into a world, into a technical ability, or technological ability, I should say, which will make real world domination absolutely a reality. I'm talking about the surveillance state. I'm talking about social credit. I'm talking about the digital footprint you leave everywhere. That's what I'm talking about. Your entire life is an open book. And there are now things called ruin files out in the world that have gathered your digital footprint, ready to strike you down if necessary. And then we all have things that we probably wouldn't like to share with others necessarily, but it's out there in the world. And
it's a dossier for
absolutely.
them to use for everybody.
And it's the first time in a long time that we have reached this crossroads where it is now a possibility. I mean, what we are capable of now when it comes to control, surveillance, etc., and not to mention deepfake, and there are dreams that Goebbels and Hitler and Stalin and others had. Only dreams. In their wildest dreams, they couldn't imagine what we
imagine they had deepfakes back then.
Oh, dude, it would have been phenomenal.
Yes.
But what happened though historically? And this is really interesting. It's a very interesting analysis. With Russia down, the money changers now had control of every major national economy. Not all the economies, but the ones that counted. Like a steamroller moving and a wolf gathering its pack, there was only one thing left to do, and that was to go global. The first attempt was the proposal at the Paris Peace Conference after World War I to set up the League of Nations. Old habits die hard, and even what they called the war to end all wars was not enough to convince nations to dissolve their boundaries, and the League died. It really did. And then the United States never, ever entered it. Woodrow Wilson would not let the United States become part of the League of Nations. Germany, Italy walked out. The League of Nations was a complete failure. If politicians really were being controlled, you would think at least one would break ranks and cry out against it. Many did. One was no less than former New York City Mayor John Halen. And this is what he said. These international bankers and Rockefeller Standard Oil interests control the majority of the newspapers and magazines in this country. They use the columns of these papers to club into submission or drive out of office public officials who refuse to do the bidding of the powerful, corrupt cliques which compose the invisible government. I urge you to watch the movie Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. Don't be put off by the fact that it was made like, I think, 70 years ago now, or in fact, that it is black and white. Please go and then look at who Jimmy Stewart was. Look at who James Stewart was as a person, all right? And then do watch the movie Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. I really urge you to do that. Now, the warning of Theodore Roosevelt has much timeliness today, even. For the real menace of our republic, the American Republic, I should say, is the invisible government, which, like a giant octopus, sprawls its slimy length over city, state, and nation. And this is now globally happening, not just in the United States. This is a global initiative. It seizes in its long and powerful tentacles the executive offices, the legislative bodies, the schools, the courts, the newspapers, and every agency created for the public protection. To depart from mere generalizations, let us say here that at the head of this octopus are the Rockefeller Standard Oil interests and a small group of powerful banking houses generally referred to as the international bankers. The little coterie of powerful international bankers virtually run the United States government for their own selfish purposes. They practically control both parties, write political platforms, make cat's paws of party leaders, use the leading men of private organizations, and resort to every device to place a nomination for high public office only such candidates as will be amenable to the dictates of corrupt big business. And this is what John Hyland, mayor of New York, had to say in 1927. These international bankers and Rockefeller Standard Oil interests control the majority of newspapers and magazines in this country. These warnings fell on deaf ears, drowned out by the music and excitement of the roaring 20s. People don't tend to complain much in times of prosperity, so the money changers used this boom time they had created to diffuse any complaints about their growing control, Dave, until, of course,
it all goes south.
Oh, yes.
And it goes south in the Depression of 1929. All of the Wall Street giants, J.P. Morgan, Joe F. Kennedy, J.D. Rockefeller, Bernard Baruch, got out of the stock market and put their assets in gold just before the crash. With control of the press and the education system, few Americans are aware that the Fed caused the Depression. It is, however, a well-known fact among leading top economists. Milton Friedman, Nobel Prize-winning economist, says the Federal Reserve definitely caused the Great Depression by contracting the amount of currency in circulation by 1/3 from 1929 to 1933. Representative Louis T. McFadden, which we've heard from earlier, says it was not accidental. It was a carefully contrived occurrence. The international bankers sought to bring about a condition of despair here so that they might emerge as rulers of us all. He also said, I think it can hardly be disputed that the statesmen and financiers of Europe are ready to take almost any means to reacquire rapidly the gold stock which Europe lost to America as a result of World War I. That says more about it, doesn't it, Mackie? $40 billion somehow vanished in the crash. It didn't really vanish. It simply shifted into the hands of the money changers. This is how Joe Kennedy went from having $4 million in 1929 to having over $100 million in 1935. During this time, the Fed, not a person, the Fed caused a 33% reduction of the money supply, causing deeper depression.
Absolutely. Now, how does the Fed create money? And we discussed this. We're going to just refresh your memory here again. We've been talking about how the privately owned Federal Reserve can produce money from thin air. Here's how it's done. Just as a quick refresher. The purchase of bonds is approved by the Federal Open Market Committee. Second step is the Fed buys the bonds, which it pays for with electronic credits made to the seller's bank. These credits are based on, wait for it, nothing, zero. It's air. It doesn't matter. The third step is the receiving banks then use the credits that they just received as reserves from which they can loan out 10 times the amount. But as we've learned earlier, there no longer is a requirement to hold anything in reserve. To reduce the amount of money in the economy, they simply reverse the process, right? So again, all money that we have in the world is debt. Once you pay down the debt, the money disappears. It is really quite something to wrap your head around. The Fed sells bonds to the public, and money is drawn from the purchaser's bank to pay for them. Each million withdrawn lowers the bank's ability to loan by 10 million. The federal bank, in this way, has overall control of the U.S. money supply, as each country's central bank does in the same way. So it's not just the United States, it's virtually every country in the world. The bankers, through the magic of fractional reserve banking, have been delegated the right to create 90% of the money supply. Now, in fact, it is 100% of the money supply in the world. And once we move into digital currency, we will lose all track, and there'll be no auditing, there'll be no accountability. Mark my words. And we're going to talk about the cryptocurrency and all that in the end. This control makes a mockery of any elected government. It places so-called leaders behind a toy steering wheel, like the plastic ones set up to amuse small children. And that's true. These Scotty from marketing and Biden, who is just falling off the podium, really hold no power whatsoever. Now, Representative Charles Lindbergh, the father of the famous aviator Lucky Lindy, puts it this way when he commented on the federal Reserve Act. So this is the father of the Lindbergh guy that flew across the Atlantic. Anyway, his father. He was the Representative Charles Lindbergh. This act establishes the most gigantic trust on earth. When the president signs this bill, the invisible government, by the monetary power, will be legalized. The people may not know it immediately, but the day of reckoning is only a few years removed. The worst legislative crime of the ages is perpetrated by this banking bill. Woodrow Wilson also had something to say about this. We have come to be one of the worst ruled, one of the most completely controlled governments in the civilized world. No longer a government of free opinion, no longer a government by a vote for the majority, but a government by the opinion and duress of a small group of dominant men. Some of the biggest men in the United States, in the field of commerce and manufacture, are afraid of something. They know that there is a power somewhere so organized, so subtle, so watchful, so interlocked, so complete, so pervasive, that they had better not speak above their breath when they speak in condemnation of it. In order to clearly establish that this is not a conspiracy theory, but is actually how things are controlled, we further quote Charles Lindbergh. From the House of Representatives, Charles Lindbergh was well placed to see exactly what was happening back then and then continues to happen today. And this is what he said. To cause high prices, all the Federal Reserve Board will be to lower the rediscount rate, producing an expansion of credit and the rising stock market. Then, when businessmen are adjusted to these conditions, it can check prosperity in mid-career by arbitrarily raising the rate of interest. It can cause the pendulum of a rising and falling market to swing gently back and forth by slight changes in the discount rate, or cause violent fluctuations for a greater rate variation. And in either case, it will possess inside information as to financial conditions and advanced knowledge of the coming change, either up or down. This is the strangest, most dangerous advantage ever placed in the hands of a special privileged class by any government that ever existed. The system is private, conducted for the sole purpose of obtaining the greatest possible profits from the use of other people's money. They know in advance when to create panics to their advantage. They also know when to stop panic. Inflation and deflation work equally well for them when they control finance.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and it works better for them when they're in control of it. That's when it is to their advantage. So right now, with all of this, zero interest rate shenanigans going on, the stock market is booming, just like they said. When was this? Far out. A long time ago, most of these quotes came from, right? And that's the cycle we're in. But I've got to say this. Adolf's bankers. Most all will be aware of Hitler's rise to power. What they probably don't know is that he was almost completely financed by money drawn from the privately owned American Federal Reserve. There's a very long quote here. And this is Congressman Louis T. McFadden yet again. Was he assassinated? Because he was very vocal against the banks. Now, he served 12 years as chairman of the Committee on Banking and Currency. After World War I, Germany fell into the hands of the international bankers. Those bankers bought her, and they now own her, lock, stock, and barrel. They have purchased her industries. They have mortgages on her soil. They control her production. They control all her public utilities. The international German bankers have subsidized the present government of Germany, and they have also supplied every dollar of the money Adolf Hitler has used in his lavish campaign to build up threat to the government of Brüning. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Good, thank you. When Brüning fails to obey the orders of the German international bankers, Hitler is brought forth to scare the Germans into submission. Ooh, the Germans. It's true.
That's chocolate. That was half an hour ago.
Sorry, we have a Simpson-esque style of humor. All right, through the Federal Reserve Board, over 30 billion of American money has been pumped into Germany. You have all heard of the spending that has taken place in Germany. Modernistic dwellings, her great planetariums, her gymnasiums, her swimming pools, her fine public highways, her perfect factories. All this was done on our money. All this was given to Germany through the Federal Reserve Board. The Federal Reserve Board has pumped so many billions of dollars into Germany that they dare not name the total.
Which brings us to Fort Knox. In 1933, new President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed a bill forcing all the American people to hand over all their gold at base rate, with the exception of rare coins. He disowned himself from the bill, claiming to have not read it, and his Secretary of the Treasury claimed this was what the experts wanted. What a shock. Bought at bargain basement price with money produced from nothing by the Federal Reserve, the gold was melted down and stacked in the newly built bullion depository called Fort Knox. Once collected in 1935, the price of gold was raised from $20.66 up to $35 per ounce.
My goodness.
I know, right? But only non-American gold qualified to be sold. This meant those who had avoided the crash by investing in gold they had shipped to London could now nearly double their money while the rest of America starved. By the end of World War II, Fort Knox did hold 70% of the world's gold. But over the years, it was sold off to the European money changers, while the public audit of Fort Knox, of the Fort Knox reserves rather, was repeatedly denied. I want to look at the gold. No, it's my gold. No. Rumors spread about the missing gold. This is Edith Roosevelt, the wife of President Roosevelt. Allegations of missing gold from our Fort Knox vaults are being widely discussed in European circles. But what is puzzling is that the administration is not hastening to demonstrate conclusively that there's no cause for concern over our gold treasure, if indeed it is in a position to do so. Finally, in 1981, almost 50 years later, right? President Ronald Reagan, was convinced to have a look into Fort Knox with a view to reintroducing the gold standard. He appointed a group called the Gold Commission. They found that the U.S. Treasury owned, wait for it, no gold at all. Yeah, that's right, Bueller. All the Fort Knox gold remaining is now being held as collateral by the Federal Reserve against the national debt, using credits made from nothing. The Fed had robbed the largest treasure of gold on Earth. Now, I need you to just completely understand this before I hand it over to my esteemed colleague. All the gold, like 70% of, the largest hoard of gold that ever existed that we know of in human history was purchased with nothing. Like if you think about it, you say it can't be true. Surely this cannot be the truth, Mackie. This is outrageous. It makes Ocean's 11 look like, I don't know, like a walk in the park. It cannot be so. How is it possible that with nothing, these people were able to get, most of the gold in the world? And not only that, forget the gold. Now they're in a position to increase their wealth to levels that are now completely meaningless. It no longer matters. They're now forever the richest people in the world. As long as we have this economic system, they're in charge because they will just create more wealth for themselves out of nothing. It will never, ever come to be that this system is going to end unless it is made to do so. Because the system has now reached a point, all things being equal, that it will perpetuate itself into eternity. It's astounding. And it is true. None of this is made up. None of this is crazy conspiracy theory. Do the research. How much gold is there? Where is the gold? Because it's a real thing. But where is it? It's not there. It has to be somewhere, right? But it's not there. But it's somewhere. Someone has it. But Dave, what happened after that?
Well, yeah, what's really funny, Mickey, it comes to mind of only recent years when Germany said, hey, can we take a look at all the gold? Do you remember that?
Yeah, I know.
And Fort Knox, they went, no. And then eventually, I think it was like 18 months or greater later, they caved in and said, well, we'll give you a look at the gold. And Germany said, will it be our gold? And he said, no, it'll just be some gold and you can't touch it and it'll be behind bars. And there you go. It'll prove that we've got all the gold.
All of it.
Yes. How much did you say? Oh, it doesn't matter. It'll be all of it, right? Whatever. So they would have just, had trucks shipping it from somewhere else to sit it there on loan so they could show someone that they had it. Just nuts. And this is still going on. This isn't an event that took place, 1981, that's 40 years ago. Yeah. It's still happening. Anyway, so World War II. We spoke about World War I, World War II, 1939 to 1945. World War II saw the US debt increased by, wait for it, Bueller, 598%, while Japan's debt went up by a whopping 1,348%, with France up by pretty close to the US by 583% and Canada up by 417%. That's their debt. Oh, God. With the hot war over, the Cold War began, the arms race causing more and more borrowing. Now the money changers could really concentrate on global domination. Step 1, the European Monetary Union and NAFTA. Step 2, centralize the global economy via the World Bank, the IMF, and GATT, now the WTO, the World Trade Organization.
Insane. Completely insane. Which brings us to the World Central Bank, which is from 1948 until, today.
Wow.
And we're going to take this in turns. In Washington, the headquarters of both the World Bank and the IMF, International Monetary Fund, face each other on the same street. What are these organizations and who controls them? Good questions all. To find out, we need to look back to just after World War I. At this point, the money changers were attempting to consolidate the central banks under the guise of peacemaking. To stop future wars, they put forward the formation of a World Central Bank named the Bank of International Settlements. You should be very familiar with that, everybody. A World Court called the World Court in The Hague, and a World Executive for Legislation called the League of Nations. In his 1966 book entitled Tragedy and Hope, President Clinton's mentor Carroll Quigley writes about this the following. The powers of financial capitalism had a far-reaching plan, nothing less than to create a world system of financial control in private hands, able to dominate the political system of each country and the economy of the world as a whole. This system was to be controlled in a feudalist fashion by the central banks of the world, acting in concert by secret agreements arrived at in frequent meetings and conferences. Bilderberg. The apex of the system was to be the Bank for International Settlements in Basel, Switzerland, a private bank owned and controlled by the world's central banks, which were themselves private corporations. Each central bank sought to dominate its government by its ability to control treasury loans, to manipulate foreign exchanges, to influence the level of economic activity in the country, and to influence cooperative politicians by subsequent economic rewards in the business world. Now, that's what Quigley said in 1966. They got 2 out of 3. The League of Nations failed largely owing to the suspicions of the people, and while opposition concentrated on this, the other 2 proposals snuck their way through. It would have taken another war to wear the public down, or rather the public's resistance. Wall Street invested heavily to rebuild Germany, as the Chase Bank had propped up the Russian Revolution. Now the Chase merged with the Warburg Manhattan Bank to form the Chase Manhattan, which would later merge with the Chemical Bank to become the largest bank on Wall Street. In 1944, the US approved its full participation in the IMF and the World Bank. By 1945, the Second League of Nations was approved under the new name, the United Nations. The war had dissolved all opposition. The methods used in the National Banking Act of 1864 and the Federal Reserve Act of 1913 were now simply used on a global scale. The Federal Reserve Act, allowing the creation of Federal Reserve notes, is mirrored by the IMF's authority to produce money called special drawing rights, SDRs. It is estimated the IMF has produced $30 billion worth of SDRs so far. In the United States, SDRs are already accepted as legal money, and all other member nations are being pressured to follow suit. With SDRs being partially backed by gold, a world gold standard is sneaking its way in through the back door, which comes with no objection from the money changers, who now hold 2/3 of the world's gold anyway, and can use this to structure the world's economy to their advantage. We have gone from the goldsmith fraud being reproduced on a national scale through the Bank of England and the Federal Reserve to a global level with the IMF and the World Bank. Unless we together stop giving these exchange units their power by our collective faith in them, the future will probably see the Intergalactic Bank and the Federation of Planets Reserve set up in much the same way. This radical transfer of power has taken place with absolutely no mandate from the people, Dave.
Yeah. Nations borrow special drawing right from the International Monetary Fund in order to pay interest on their mounting debts. Oh, what a beautiful system, Mackie. It's so beautiful. I want to hold it. With these SDRs produced at no cost, the IMF charges more interest. This, contrary to bold claims, does not alleviate poverty of further any development. It just creates a steady flow of wealth from borrowing nations to the money changers who now control the IMF and the World Bank. The permanent debt of the third world countries is constantly being increased to provide temporary relief from the poverty being caused by previous borrowing. These repayments already exceed the amount of new loans. By 1992, Africa's debt had reached $290 billion, which is 2.5 times greater than it was in 1980. A noble attempt to repay it has caused increased infant mortality and unemployment, plus deteriorating schools and general health and welfare problems. I sound like Humphrey. As world resources continue to be sucked into this insatiable black hole of greed, if allowed to continue, the entire world will face a similar fate. As one prominent Brazilian politician, Luiz Ignacio Silva, put it, and I quote, "Without being radical or overly bold, I would tell you that the Third World War has already started, a silent war, not for that reason any less sinister. This war is tearing down Brazil, Latin America, and practically all of the Third World. Instead of soldiers dying, there are children. Instead of millions of wounded, there are millions of unemployed. Instead of destruction of bridges, there is the tearing down of factories, schools, hospitals, and entire economies. It is a war by the United States against the Latin American continent and the Third World. It is a war over the foreign debt, one which has its main weapon interest, a weapon more deadly than the atom bomb and more shattering than a laser beam." I think he was spot on. if a group of or organization had used its hard-earned money to help these developing nations, then we'll sympathize that there should be a real effort to repay those loans. But the money used was created from fractional reserve banking. The money loaned to the third world came from the 90% the banks allow themselves to loan on the 10% they actually held. It didn't exist. It was created from nothing, and now people are suffering and dying in an effort to pay it back.
Correct. Which of course is never possible, because if you pay it back, the money supply collapses.
That's right.
So this will never. It is such a. I mean, the word. Oh, it's the right word. Evil. It is such an evil scheme. Such a. I mean, if you understand it fully, right, then you have to ask yourself, how could it possibly be that it is allowed to exist? Again, I come back to the individuals that let it allow, the kings and queens, etc., the presidents, you know, the people that couldn't be coerced or bribed into accepting this, right, the decision makers, if you will, they were simply done away with.
Mickey, I picture Dick Dastardly.
Yeah.
Or even, you know, Mr. Burns. Yes, Money Feet. In the back rooms, laughing.
Yes, absolutely.
You know,
someone said this.
Yeah.
Someone in the chat last week, someone said this, and I think I can't remember who said it, but there was a quote there that said, you know, the people that understand the monetary system either have too much to gain from it, A, or B, have absolutely no power to do anything about it. I think that was about the quote. Something slightly different. But the point is, we all need to educate ourselves to understand this. I mean, because I speak to many people, and I've said this before, working in the banks, even senior banking people, and they have no idea that this is that's how our monetary system works. No one has. I mean, it's all. See, they're using jargon and code words, economic terms, you know, and macroeconomic terms, and blah 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 blah, to obfuscate the simple meaning or the simple operation of our economic system. Because it is very simple, really, at its heart. And they're making it complex, and you know, it's science, you know, you don't understand it, blah blah. It's really easy to understand, but they have to obfuscate, they have to reveal, they have to hide it, they have to occult it. Because if people truly understood it, I don't think people would stand for it. Maybe now they would, because people have been sufficiently beaten down and euthanized and anesthetized as well.
Simplified. Where
maybe there is no longer this strong resistance that would exist.
There's not even a strong resistance to anything any longer. We just, you know, you tell us, Quimby, right?
Yeah.
It's the attitude of the people.
Yeah.
No one cares.
Yeah.
As long as they're individuals, aren't specifically targeted. Oh, that's someone else.
Yeah.
That's not really me. That's someone else. And you know, they know better than I do.
Yeah. It is
crazy
really,
opinion.
You know, but it's a real issue, because this will never end. This system, now that all the laws are passed, okay, all the opposition that existed has been overcome, and we are there. The only thing that I see as a problem now for this system is cryptocurrency, but we'll get to that in due course. Because, of course, the next logical move is to go to digital currency. And I believe that cryptocurrency short-circuited the gold standard, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Because cryptocurrency is offering people all of a sudden something that these bankers actually have no control over whatsoever. You know, a currency that only exists to fulfill, you know, the need of the people, really. And it's a relatively free-form currency. That's why it fluctuates so much. And the digital currencies that the banks are pitting against it, or the digital currencies, not just the one, will have a lot of problems as well. I mean, initially digital currencies were, you know, almost unthinkable, but now the banks have no choice but to go ahead and do this. But then, you know, they will outlaw cash, meaning, you know, the physical cash will become outlawed. Having any kind
completely.
Having any kind of portable wealth.
It will become an arrestable offence.
Yeah, because why do you have gold? You must be a drug dealer. Or why do you have, I don't know, coins or diamonds or whatever
That's
it might
so that
be?
you can do a transaction outside of the system.
Bingo.
Mickey.
And that's no longer possible now. And with the technology that's out there now, right? The surveillance, the social credit, and people, I guess spying on each other as well. Chances are that you will be caught. They're clamping down on the casinos for the money laundering, etc., etc. Of course, they're not going to clamp down on the drug trade because that's financing most of the government's, secret services.
That's right.
But we are there now. We are at the precipice. We are at the edge of the cliff, and I don't know if the cryptocurrencies can stop us from falling over or not, but if we leave it unchecked, if this goes on for the next few years, maybe less, then all hope of having any kind of freedom is going to completely evaporate, because you will be completely in the hands of the people that hold the strings, the digital strings. They can erase you. They can erase you. Your very existence is now in question.
Wow. There's the end of show number 485. Mickey's completely right. Do you know what? This is David Mickey, Shiny Side Out, and we're going to hand the reins over to After Hours with Jer Bear. You should check his great shows out. Catch us next week. Thanks for allowing us into your lives, and we'll see you then. Stay aware.